You have been the chief long enough to know the difference between what you feel and what is useful to feel. You have managed both for years. But there is something you have stopped managing, something that arrived the first night at the fire and has been growing since, patient and real, through everything that followed. The shaman is back. She told you the truth. The weight shifted. Now it is time to deal with what remains. The previous stories have been about accumulation, the accumulation of decisions and their consequences, of feelings and their management, of knowledge and what it cost to acquire it. This tribe has survived exile and forest and return and murder and illness and the return of the dead. It has been shaped by all of it into something harder and more honest than it was at the beginning. You have been shaped by all of it too. You are not the person who looked at a woman on a narrow path and felt a splinter of something enter him. You are not even the person who walked back from the eastern forest with a weight in his chest and a face he could not stop seeing. You are something further along than both of those people, tempered by everything that came after. And you are in love with the shaman. This is the plainest way to say it, and you have been avoiding saying it plainly for long enough. Not in words, not even to yourself, though the thing itself has been present and growing since the first night, since the fire, since the look across the flames that neither of you looked away from. She told you the truth. The weight changed, the hand at the dying fire. It is time to deal with what remains. In this story, you are the chief, and you are done managing what you feel. You knew on the first night, not fully, not in the way that knowing becomes actionable, the clear knowledge that says this is what is happening, and here is what it means. It was smaller than that and more precise, the way a splinter was precise, a single point of sensation locating itself exactly. That you looked at her across the fire, and something in you oriented toward her the way a body oriented toward warmth, not dramatically, not consciously, simply the way of things. You had filed it, as you filed everything, under a category that you did not open often. Then she was gone, and the category opened by itself. 3 days of not being able to close it. 3 days of the tribe carrying the loss and you carrying it differently. The specific quality of losing someone you had not yet fully acknowledged, having. The flowers around her body, your hand on her arm, the cold of it. Saying her name into the silence. And then she was back. The morning she walked out of the trees was the morning you understood that what was in the category had not diminished in the 3 days of her absence. It had grown. Absence was supposed to diminish things. This had not diminished, this had clarified. In the weeks since her return you had watched it with the same careful attention you brought to everything, checking it for the places where it could be explained as something simpler, something more manageable. Gratitude for her survival, relief, the natural closeness of two people who had shared difficult things. It was not those things, or it was those things and also something else, something underneath all of them that was its own thing entirely and did not reduce to anything simpler. The night at the dying fire. Her hand finding yours across the ash. You had not slept. There is a difference between feeling something and knowing you feel it. The feeling can be present for a long time before the knowing catches up, moving in parallel with your ordinary life. There's shaping things from underneath without being named. The naming changes it, not the feeling itself, which does not need a name to be real, but your relationship to it. Once named, it cannot be unfiled. It exists now in the open, asking to be dealt with. You looked at your wife differently now, not with hatred. This is important to say. What you felt looking at her was not the clean, sharp thing that hatred was, but something more complicated. The specific vision of a person seen clearly after a long period of slightly blurred seeing. She had always been intelligent and capable, and you had valued both of those things. You had built something alongside her, and the building had been real. But the shaman had told you the truth. She looked at him with the attention that preceded wanting. This was what the shaman had said, quietly, across the dying fire, with the certainty of someone describing something they had seen directly. Not suspicion, not inference. Seeing. You thought about the man in the eastern forest. He had been good. You had known this with certainty, even as you did what you did. The innocence of him had been visible in his face in that last fraction of a second. The confusion that had nothing of guilt in it. You had acted on a fear that turned out to be real in its source and wrong in its target. The watching had been real. The wanting had been in a different direction. The weight in your chest had not left. But its quality had changed again, shifted by the shaman's words into something with different edges. He had not deserved what happened to him. This remained true. But the thing that had driven you to it had not been entirely invented. The fear had been reading something real, just reading it at the wrong angle. You watched your wife move through the camp, and you understood her completely for the first time. She was the same person she had always been, and a person who stood beside power, because power was what she understood and needed. She had stood beside the old chief, and then she had moved toward you, and now you could see with the clarity the shaman had opened in you, the perpetual motion of her attention, always measuring, always calculating, always looking for the next light to move toward. She did not love you. She had never loved you. She had chosen you, and maintained the choosing with considerable skill. And this was its own kind of relationship, but it was not what you had believed it was. Seeing someone clearly is not the same as condemning them. What she was, she had always been. The calculation was her nature, the thing she had needed to survive in a world that offered women limited options. You did not hate her for it, but you could no longer pretend you did not see it. The shaman had opened your eyes, and eyes that have been opened do not easily close again. You found her at the forest edge in the morning. She was there often in the early hours, the time before the tribe fully woke, the time she used the way you used it, for the thinking that required space around it. She was sitting with her back against the large oak, the one she had taken your hand at, the bark rough and gray in the morning light. She looked up when you arrived. She did not look surprised. You had come to understand that very little surprised her. You sat down beside her. For a while you did not speak. The morning was cold and clear, and the forest made its sounds, and the camp was a murmur behind you. You had rehearsed nothing. You had learned that rehearsal was not useful with her, that she received what you actually were more reliably than what you prepared to be. "I need to tell you something," you said. "I know," she said. Of course she knew. This was what she was, the open channel, the receiver of what was actually present. You did not find it unsettling anymore. You had found it unsettling once, before you understood that she was not judging what she received, only receiving it. "I have been carrying something since the first night," you said, "since the fire, since you came and sat across from me, and I looked at you." She was quiet. "I do not know the word for it," you said. "There may not be a word for it yet." "There will be," she said. "Eventually someone will make one." You looked at her. She was looking at the forest, her profile against the gray morning, at the specific quality of her face that had been in your awareness since the first night, the directness of it, the absence of performance. "I want to deal with what remains," you said. "The wife, what she is, what she has been. I want to see it clearly, and then I want it to be finished." She turned and looked at you. "You already see it clearly," she said. "I want her to see that I see it," you said. "I want the tribe to see it. I do not want to carry this alone anymore." The shaman was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised you. "I can show you," she said. "If you want to be certain, I can show the tribe." "How?" you asked. She looked at the oak tree beside her. Then she looked back at you. "Trust me," she said. You had trusted her since the fire. Before you knew you were trusting her, before you could have named it, the trust had been there. the specific quality of certainty that came from being in the presence of someone who was what they appeared to be. Trust was not something you extended easily. You had learned its cost in the exile, in the eastern forest, in every difficult decision of a leadership that required you to know who was reliable and who was not. You trusted her. You said yes. She told you what she was going to do at night, after the tribe slept. You sat beside her at the forest edge and listened, and the part of you that moved through the world by what was visible and provable sat very still while she spoke. She had been to the other place. She had held the thread that connected everything alive. She had come back with things that had not been in her before she went. One of those things was this: she could give the living world a direction, not control, she said carefully. She was precise about this, the way she was precise about all the things she knew. Not control the way you controlled a hunting party with hand signals and positioning, more like influence, the way the moon influenced the water, the way warmth influenced the direction a plant grew. And she could take something living and give it a shape it would not have found on its own. A tree, she said. A young one, still growing, still becoming. She could give it a direction, not permanently, for as long as she held her attention on it. The shape it would take was the shape of a man. You looked at her. She looked back. A man, you said. Large, she said. Strong. The kind that draws the eye. You understood. The test would not be an accusation. Accusations could be denied. What she was describing was a demonstration, something the tribe would see with their own eyes, something that could not be argued with after the fact, because the fact itself would be visible to everyone. Your wife would not know it was a test. She would see a man, a stranger, perhaps, a traveler, the kind of person who occasionally appeared at the edge of camps and were assessed and sometimes brought in. She would respond as she actually responded, not as she would respond if she knew she was being watched. The thought of it made something cold move through you. Not cold like fear, cold like clarity. The specific temperature of a thing being looked at directly after a long time of being approached only sideways. You had spent years reading situations. You had built your leadership on the ability to understand what was actually happening rather than what people wanted you to think was happening. And yet, you had been wrong. You had misread the direction of your wife's attention, and a good man had paid for the misreading. What the shaman was offering was a way of seeing that did not depend on your interpretation. That the living world itself, shaped by her, would be the evidence. When? You asked. Tomorrow, she said. Give me tonight. You did not sleep. The shaman had gone to the forest, and you lay in the camp and listened to the night and thought about what morning would bring. The tribe slept around you, their breathing the familiar rhythm of people who did not know that tomorrow something would change. Your wife was sleeping somewhere behind you, her breathing even. The sleep of someone whose conscience was clear, or whose conscience had long since made its accommodations with itself. From the forest, very faint, you heard her. Not words, not the ritual sounds you had heard before, the low, continuous voice that moved under the surface of ordinary sound. Something else. Something quieter and more fundamental. A hum that was not quite a hum, and a sound at the edge of what could be heard. The kind of sound that you felt in the chest before you heard it with the ears. And then, further out, something that made the hair on your arms rise. A sound from the trees that was not a tree sound, not wind, not the settling of branches, not any animal you had catalogued in years of living beside this forest. A sound like growth, you thought, and then thought that was not right either. A sound like attention being paid to something. A sound like the world doing something it did not usually do. It lasted for a long time. Then it stopped. Then the forest was the ordinary forest again. The ordinary sounds, the ordinary dark. You lay and stared at the shelter ceiling and felt something that you had not expected to feel. Fear, not of her, never of her, but of what she was, and of the size of what she carried in her, and what it meant that a person could carry something that large. You had known she was gifted since the first night. You had understood intellectually what her gift was. But understanding and lying in the dark, listening to the forest change, were different things. She was extraordinary. The word was insufficient. You lay in the dark and understood that the word was insufficient and that you had no better one yet, and that this too was something she had told you, that the words came later, that someone would eventually make them. To love someone extraordinary is its own particular experience, not because the loving is different, but because what you are loving is larger than the ordinary, requires more of you to hold it, demands that you expand to contain what you feel about it. You had loved before, or believed you had. What you felt lying in the dark, listening to the forest change, was nothing like what you had believed. Morning came. You were ready. You saw it before the tribe did. You had positioned yourself to see it. At the edge of the camp in the early morning, watching the tree line where the shaman had gone the night before. The tribe was waking behind you, the ordinary sounds of morning beginning, and you watched the trees. And then it was there, at the edge of the forest between two large oaks, standing with the specific quality of stillness that large things had when they were at rest. The shape of a man, broad-shouldered, tall, the physical presence of someone built for sustained strength. The morning light caught it strangely, the way it caught living wood, a quality of surface that was not quite skin and not quite bark, but something in between, something that your eyes processed as a man before your mind caught up and said, "Wait." Your heart stopped. This is the honest thing to say. Your heart stopped for one full beat and then resumed at a different rhythm, faster and less steady. The rhythm of someone who had just encountered something that did not fit in any category previously available. She had told you. She had described exactly what she was going to do. You had understood it intellectually, had agreed to it, had prepared for it. And still, seeing it standing at the forest edge in the early morning light, you felt the cold move through you that moved through all humans when they encountered something that exceeded their framework. It was not a man. You knew this. It looked like a man. It stood like a man. It had the weight and presence of a man. But underneath the shape there was something that your body recognized as other, and the specific quality of the living world arranged into an unfamiliar form. A tree wearing the shape of a person with the particular unnervingness of something that was almost ordinary but not quite. You breathed. You reminded yourself. She had done this. She had given the living world a direction. This was her. It was safe. It was the test. Your heart did not fully slow. There are things that the mind accepts that the body does not. Your mind knew what this was. Your body knew what it looked like. Both of these things were simultaneously true, and the simultaneous truth of them was deeply uncomfortable, in a way that no amount of preparation had been able to prevent. She had said the words would come eventually. You thought, the word for this feeling is awe, and awe is indistinguishable from terror until you know which one it is. The tribe saw it one by one as the morning progressed. You watched each person notice it. The quick-eyed woman first, of course, her attention moving to the tree line with the automatic vigilance of someone who always knew where the edges of the camp were. She went still. Then she looked at you. You held her gaze and gave a small movement of your head, and she understood, or understood enough, which was to stay where she was and watch. The old man next, squinting from his place near the fire. Then two of the younger ones who moved toward each other automatically the way people move toward others when they encountered something uncertain. The figure at the tree line stood, unmoving, simply present. You watched your wife. She was doing the morning tasks, the ordinary movements of a woman in a functioning camp. And you watched her with the full attention you had been giving her covertly for weeks, and now gave openly. Because what was about to happen required you to see everything. She looked up. Her eyes found the figure at the tree line, the way eyes found things that were worth finding, not searching, arriving. the specific quality of attention that the shaman had described, that you had seen before at the water and elsewhere, the attention that preceded assessment, the assessment that preceded wanting. Her body changed, subtly, the way bodies changed when they made a decision below the level of words, a slight orientation, a turning toward, the unconscious adjustment of position that said something before the person had consciously decided to say it. She straightened. She touched her hair. She looked at the figure again. You had hoped she would surprise you. This is the honest thing to admit. Some part of you, the part that had built a life alongside this woman and had believed for a long time that the building was mutual, had hoped that the test would produce a different result. That she would look at the figure and look away and go back to her work, and the shaman would have been wrong, and you would have been wrong, and a man in the eastern forest would have died for a fear that had no basis. You had hoped for this. She did not give it to you. She walked toward the figure, not quickly, the walk of a person who was doing something casual, something that had a reason attached to it, the walk of someone who had decided that the stranger at the tree line should be assessed, and that she was the appropriate person to do the assessing. This was, you noted, exactly the walk she had used on the narrow path a long time ago. The same walk, the same purpose, wearing a different face. The tribe had stopped what it was doing, not all at once. In the way that attention shifted in a small group, the awareness of something unusual spreading outward from the people who had noticed first to the people who noticed that they had noticed. By the time your wife was halfway to the tree line, 15 people were watching her with the specific quality of people who did not yet know what they were watching, but understood that it mattered. The shaman appeared beside you. You had not heard her come from the forest. She was simply there, at your shoulder, her presence, the quiet presence it always was. You did not look at her. You kept your eyes on your wife. But you felt the shaman's attention, the focused quality of it, the sense of something being held with great care. The figure at the tree line had not moved. It stood in the morning light, and your wife approached it, and the tribe watched, and you watched, and the shaman beside you held whatever she was holding. Your wife reached the figure. She stopped in front of it. Close. The distance of a conversation, at the distance of something more than a conversation. She looked up at it. Her face, from where you stood, was the face she used when she was interested in something, the specific expression of someone who had found what they were looking for. She spoke. You could not hear the words. You did not need to hear the words. The words were not the thing. The thing was visible from where you stood, visible to 15 people who were now watching in complete silence. The camp, as quiet as it had ever been in the mornings. She reached out. Her hand moved toward the figure. She touched it. The moment of contact was the moment of truth. Not because touching proved something that the approaching had not already proved, but because it was the moment the reversible became irreversible. The moment when what had been a possibility became an act. Yet you watched her hand touch the figure, and you felt the last remaining uncertainty dissolve. Not into anger, not into the sharp, clean heat of betrayal, but into something quieter and more final. Clarity, the complete and total clarity of a thing, seen all the way through to its end. Her hand did not leave the figure cleanly. The bark came first. Not on the figure, on her. Where her palm touched the figure, the skin of her hand began to change. The texture of it, the grain, the color draining to the gray-brown of old bark. It spread from the point of contact, moving slowly up her fingers, across her palm, toward her wrist. She could feel it. You could see her feel it. The sound she made was not a scream. It was something smaller and more terrible than a scream. At the sound of a person whose understanding of what was possible had just broken open. She pulled her hand away. The bark retreated. Slowly, the way it had come, pulling back from her fingers and her palm until her hand was her hand again, unmarked, as if it had not happened. But she had felt it, and 15 people watching had seen her feel it. And she knew, in the way that people knew things that their bodies had just told them directly, that what had happened to her hand would have kept spreading if she had not let go. The figure changed. Slowly, the way a living thing changed, not in a single moment but in the continuous motion of something becoming what it was. The shape that had been a man began to be what it had always been underneath the shape, the grain of wood visible through the apparent skin. The branches reasserting themselves through what had appeared to be arms, the roots finding the ground, the bark returning to the surface of what was bark. It took perhaps 10 breaths. Your wife's hand was on a tree. She understood what had happened before she turned. You could see it in the set of her back. The specific posture of someone who had just received information they had not prepared to receive and were assembling themselves around it. Then she turned. She saw you. She saw the shaman beside you. She saw the tribe. 15 people standing in the morning light of the camp, watching her with 15 different expressions that were all variations of the same expression. Not judgment exactly, something more fundamental than judgment, the expression of people who had seen something they could not unsee. But your wife's face did not crumble. You had expected it to crumble. Or part of you had, the part that still saw her as the person she had been to you for years. It did not crumble. It went very still, the specific stillness of someone who had assessed a situation and understood that there was no version of this that went well for her. She looked at you. You looked back. There was nothing to say. The 15 people around you had seen what they had seen. The tree was a tree. Her hand had been on it a moment ago, in the way you put your hand on something you wanted. There was nothing to say. The tribe had seen it. This was the thing you had needed. Not for yourself. You had understood what she was long before this morning, but for the tribe, who deserved to understand what had been living in their midst, and for your own accounting, had the internal ledger that had been carrying the weight of the eastern forest for too long. The man had died for a fear that read the situation correctly, but aimed at the wrong person. This morning the situation had been read correctly by everyone. The ledger did not balance. It would never balance. But it was at least accurate now. You walked toward her. The camp was very quiet. The fire crackling was the loudest sound, the ordinary fire doing its ordinary thing, while the rest of the world held its breath. 15 people watching. The shaman behind you, not following, simply present, the way she was always simply present. You stopped in front of your wife. You looked at her. She looked at you. In her eyes you saw everything she was, the intelligence, the calculation, the specific kind of survival that had been her way of moving through the world since before you knew her. You did not hate any of it. You understood all of it. Understanding was not the same as acceptance. You thought of the morning the old chief had called you forward. You thought of yourself, standing in front of him with the whole tribe behind him, watching. You thought of the single word. Yet you thought of how small it had felt, how insufficient, how it had sent you into the forest with nothing, without explanation, without the dignity of being told why. You did not want to be the old chief. You had never wanted to be him. But you understood now that some words were single words, not because the speaker had nothing more to say, but because everything that needed saying had already been seen by everyone present. The word was not the communication. The word was the closing of what the seeing had already communicated. The tribe had seen. Go, you said. One word. She did not argue. She was too intelligent to argue, too clear-sighted to pretend that argument was available to her. She looked at you for one more moment, and in that look you saw something that you had not expected to see. Not guilt, not shame. Something almost like relief. The specific expression of someone who has been found out and is underneath the immediate consequences of being found out, finally not carrying the weight of not being found out. She turned. She gathered what she could carry, quickly, efficiently, the movements of a practical person who understood that speed was now the only useful quality available. The tribe parted as she walked through them. Not dramatically. Simply the way water parted for a stone moving through it. 15 people, watching. The quick-eyed woman with her straight, clear gaze. The old man with his weathered face. The children, not fully understanding enough. She walked to the tree line. She did not look back. The forest took her in the way it took everything, without comment, without ceremony. As simply opening and closing around what entered it. You had said the word the old chief had said to you. You had stood where he stood and looked at someone across the camp and said the word that ended something. You had known this was coming, had felt the inevitability of it building for weeks, and still the saying of it left something in you that needed a moment to settle. Not regret, not doubt, something more like the weight of a pattern recognizing itself. Chiefs were all the same, not in their character, in what the role required of them eventually. You had become what you had been made by. She was gone. The forest was at the edge of the camp the way it always was. 15 people, standing in the morning light, and the shaman, beside you, saying nothing, simply there. That evening the tribe gathered at the fire as it always gathered. The day had continued after the morning, as days always continued, because a tribe needed to eat and the children needed attending to. And the work did not stop for the dramatic moments any more than the forest stopped for them. Life was not dramatic most of the time. It was the ordinary work of ordinary hours, and the dramatic moments were simply the moments when the ordinary arrangement of things changed and what remained had to be assessed and understood and worked with. What remained was this: a tribe of 15 people, a chief, and a shaman. You sat at the fire and the tribe was around you and the shaman was to your left, the position she had taken on the first evening, and you were aware of her in the way you had always been aware of her. The specific quality of a presence that your body recognized before your mind did anything with the recognition. The quick-eyed woman caught your eye across the fire. She said nothing. She raised one corner of her mouth, barely visible. The expression of someone who had understood for a long time what was happening and was not going to pretend otherwise now that everyone else had caught up. The old man was eating. The children were settling for the night, the ordinary sounds of a group of people ending their day. You looked at the shaman. She was looking at the firelight on her face, the specific quality of it that you had noticed on the very first night, the way it found her and showed her. The extraordinary dark eyes, the directness of the face, and the absence of performance that had always been the thing that distinguished her from everyone else you had known. She turned and looked at you. You looked back. In the light of the fire, with the tribe around you and the forest at the edges and the night coming down, you understood something that you had not had words for until now. The shaman had said that the words came eventually, that someone would make them. You did not have them yet. But you had the thing itself, which was older than words and would be there waiting when the words arrived. This is not the end of the story. There is still the war coming, the old chief's wife in another tribe pulling strings toward a conflict that began with a look on a path. There is still the future, the tribe's future, everything that has not happened yet. But this evening, this fire, this woman beside you who went to the place between worlds and came back and told you the truth and stood beside you in the morning, this is the thing that will hold through everything that comes after. Some things are built to hold. The fire burned. The tribe slept. You stayed awake a little longer. The shaman stayed awake beside you. The forest was at the edges of the firelight, deep and patient and full of everything it had always been full of. Tomorrow the work would continue. Tonight this was enough. A note on history. The fantastical element of this story. The shaman's ability to give living things a temporary form. Steps beyond what archaeological evidence can support. What the evidence does support is that shamanic practitioners in prehistoric cultures were believed by their communities to have abilities that exceeded ordinary human capacity, including the ability to influence the natural world through ritual practice. Whether such abilities existed in any literal sense is not a question archaeology can answer. What it can tell us is that the belief in such abilities was widespread, consistent across cultures with no contact with each other, and sufficiently real to the people who held it that it shaped the way communities were organized and how their most important members were regarded. At the social dynamic at the center of this story, the chief choosing the shaman over his wife would have had significant practical implications in a small prehistoric group. The shaman's status in such a community was often separate from and sometimes superior to that of the political leader, creating a potential alliance between the two most powerful individuals in the group that would have been understood by all members as significant. The exile of the wife mirrors the exile at the beginning of this series. The repetition is intentional. Patterns in human behavior do not require awareness to repeat themselves. They simply recur in new people and new circumstances, because the underlying conditions that generate them recur. She walked into the forest and did not look back. What happened to her after that is the next story. Good night.